Hi friends, my name's Trish Roberts and you're watching Faint Signals from Vega. So I heard that Sane progressive Debbie Lusignan, and I didn't really feel like addressing that person again since she threw the black community under the bus and started disparaging their need to organize and calling identity politics divisive, and also that the black community was going to become what they abhor and all of that. And basically, ever since Claudia Stauber, her friend, was refused to be able to live stream in a Black Alliance for Peace closed group at UNAC, the anti-war conference. I mean, this is where all this stuff from Debbie Lusignan has come from. Her best friend, Claudia Stauber, a white woman, wanted to enter a closed black group at a peace conference, at an anti-war conference, and the Black Alliance for Peace group said, okay, you can come in even though it was a closed group, but they said, but on one condition that you don't, but they said to her, not the condition, but they said, but we don't want anybody live streaming except for one person in the group. And Claudia Stauber, ever since that, even though they invited her to lunch after that group, and she seemed quite fine in the group, according to a video I watched, she was quite happy being in the group for an hour or so. She just wasn't allowed to live stream. And then she even had lunch with them afterwards, and she was fine with that. And then when she got home a couple of days later, she posts this really angry video about them and called it a situation of reverse racism. And it's been downhill ever since for those two, Claudia Stauber and Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive. They've been bagging the black community and identity politics ever since then. You know, it's all stemmed from that stupid incident. But now, because a lot of people have turned against that channel, Sane Progressive, because of her throwing the black community under the bus and calling them racist and saying they're going to become what they abhor, and all this obfuscation she's been doing ever since, and it's been the last 3 months, and she continues to do it. Now she's bagging modern monetary theory because the people who align with the black community, a lot of the people from Real Progressives, a group that promotes modern monetary theory, which is an economic reality that exists right now. It's not a cult like Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive, says it is, and it doesn't have to be aligned with Bernie Sanders. I subscribe to modern monetary theory. I don't know much about it, but I think that it's a very important issue. That's why I mention it. It's something that exists right now, and if people don't know about it, they're not going to be able to act accordingly. Knowledge is power, so if you don't know about modern monetary theory, I suggest that you visit Real Progressives. That is at Real Progressive, that's singular, on Facebook, and I'll leave the address to that group. And there's also a couple of groups, that was a page, and there's also a couple of groups that you can join too, and there's a number of people, and I'll leave their names that you can follow and find out about modern monetary theory. And it's an economic reality that exists right now. It's not a theory. It's an unfortunate name, but it's not a theory. It's an economic reality that exists right now. And as this update said, and that I read recently, it said, if we acknowledge modern monetary theory, which is our economic reality, we take away the excuse politicians use to not give people health care, jobs and education, clean water, renewable energy, and a better infrastructure. If we take away their excuse, the 99% win. That's why some progressives are desperately trying to educate the rest of us about MMT. And I will, at the end of this, I will actually read out this update about MMT. It's a few points about the economy that people might want to know, and I have very little interest in economic issues. I did economics at high school, but I really found it very, very dry. But this is something that is really important for people to know, and that's why I mention it. It's very important for the U.S. citizens to understand. And as Debbie Lusignan said, she claims there's no point in any of this. It's a cult, and that that what's the point in knowing about this? You're not going to be able to do anything about it because the whole system has been usurped, and politicians are just like the mob now. You know, they've usurped everything. Well, that might be true. Excuse me, that might be true that a lot of the whole political structure has been usurped by a kind of mob. It's a corporatocracy, a kleptocracy, and they're not going to do what the public want. Well, that might be true, but the fact is that modern monetary theory is something that most people in the US are not aware of. They're not aware of the fact that federal taxes don't fund spending, and that the Congress holds the purse strings, and that the Congress never ever has any trouble. Have you ever noticed that Congress never has any trouble finding money for war? They can dish out, you know, $59 billion for military, or $200 billion, or whatever. They can continually find money very easily to fund imperialist adventures in other countries. And does anybody ever wonder why? That's because the US can't go broke now, basically. They haven't been tied to the gold standard since 1971. The US can easily find money to fund these wars, easily. The Congress holds the purse strings. So if the Congress holds the purse strings, and there's really no restraint on that because federal taxes don't fund spending, federal taxes don't fund those wars, Congress holds the purse strings. So if Congress can easily find money for those, you know, for hundreds of billions of dollars for war and to prop up the military-industrial complex, then they will have no trouble. They can afford single payer health care. They can afford to fix infrastructure. They can afford a whole lot of things. So if you don't understand what modern monetary theory is, and it's unfortunate that it's called a theory, but if you don't understand what it is, and you live in the United States, then you need to understand what it is, because knowledge is power. The fact is that despite the fact that there might be electoral fraud in these various every 4 years, and the fact is that those politicians still rely on you to vote them in. So if you're aware that they can afford, if Congress can afford to fund single payer health care and fix infrastructure and all the various social services that you all need, if you're not aware of that, and if you're aware of that, you can actually insist your Congress member do what they can to fund these things, these social services. You can insist that, and you can say to them, if you are not going to do this for us, we're not going to vote you in. They're supposed to be public servants. So even though Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive, says, what's the point in any of this, knowing about modern monetary theory and promoting it, when the whole system has been usurped and those politicians aren't going to do anything? Well, that's like saying that no education is important. The empire is falling, it's failing, it's imploding. And this is one of the things that will help it implode, because neoliberalism is a cancer, and modern monetary theory is the cure to that. So what she's essentially saying, is that education is not important. Education about something that people need to know about and don't know about it because Congress has been lying that they can't afford these services, that they can't afford single-payer health care. They've been lying about that to you, to US citizens, and modern monetary theory actually applies to a lot of outside of the US as well. So everybody needs to know about it. Of course, different countries function differently, governments function differently. There's different nuances in various governments, but basically everybody needs to know about this issue. It will bring down, eventually it will help erode neoliberalism. And It's already happening in, I don't know, Jeremy Corbyn probably doesn't know about modern monetary theory, but he certainly is certainly part of the end days of neoliberalism in the UK. It's his election to lose the next election. But we need to support anything that educates people. And if Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive, is against education because she thinks the whole thing is usurped, that's ridiculous. Why does she even bother to have a channel if it's all pointless? I mean, of course, the duopoly is just one big mafia mob at the present time in the United States. It's serving the war military-industrial complex, and it's serving corporate overlords. But that doesn't mean that we should just stop everything else because of that. Education is key in everything. Knowledge is power. So it's very, very negligent and unfortunate that Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive, is just because she's been criticized by some people in the real progressive community about her throwing black people under the bus, doesn't mean she should then turn against and start calling MMT some sort of cult, or that it's wedded to Bernie Sanders. I don't subscribe to Bernie Sanders. A lot of people know that he's an imperialist and that he's part of the establishment. You don't have to go along with Bernie Sanders or any of these political organizations like PIP and others like them, Justice Democrats and all of that, and the draft Bernie Sanders thing. There's a lot of people who subscribe to MMT and think it's important that don't go with that. So, you shouldn't be lumping everybody in together and as if everybody's clueless about what Bernie Sanders represents in relation to the military-industrial complex and imperialism and throwing Palestinians under the bus and all of that. MMT is completely separate. It's something that we need to understand, and it's something that could actually literally save tens of thousands of lives. So it's very, very unfortunate that Debbie Lusignan has chosen to say to her 50,000 followers or whatever on YouTube or Facebook or whatever that MMT is a cult and that it's a nonsense and people shouldn't mention it. It's very irresponsible of her to do it. I mean, and this is all stemming, all this animosity from Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive, all stems from that stupid incident at UNAC, the anti-war conference, where her friend Claudia Stauber was denied being able to live stream in that Black Alliance for Peace group. This is all where all this comes from. She can obfuscate all she likes and tell people that it's all about unity and that we should all just be holding hands and there shouldn't be any separation. When people organize, like when the black community want to organize, they're a minority group. They're being killed at a rate of 2 or 3 people every day just for being black. They have every right to organize in a closed group if they want to. And calling them reverse racist, Claudia Stauber, her friend, and Debbie Lusignan going along with it, calling them reverse racist and that they're going to become what they abhor, that there's something problematic about them wanting to organize in a closed group, is ridiculous. And all the obfuscation since then by Debbie Lusignan and not owning it. I mean, it's so sad. It's sad because, she's an intelligent woman, and I used to follow her channel and supported her and even gave a donation toward her buying some new equipment. And then she throws black people under the bus and continues to obfuscate about that issue. Continues. And I've even done a video before about this, about a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, a lot of her followers don't seem to get it. They just go along with whatever she says. So who's calling who cult now? I mean, I'm not going to call her group a cult, but, it's a bit silly saying that people who are educating about modern monetary theory, something that could save tens of thousands of lives, millions of lives, because so many people don't have health care, and the ones that do have it most of them can't afford it in the United States, and people are dying. They can't afford the premiums, and they're dying. So it's so irresponsible to say modern monetary theory is some sort of cult and don't follow it or whatever, because it's nonsense. It's something that exists right now. It exists right now. It's not a theory. It's an economic reality that exists right now, and that Congress can afford single-payer health care and all the other social services that everybody requires and deserves. Health care is not a privilege. It's a right. And if she complains about healthcare insurance premiums, she complains about it all the time, and that her relatives are suffering because of it. And yet she's bagging something that could actually change things for her and for millions and millions and millions of other people. Children are dying because health insurance, the healthcare industry, healthcare should not be a profit-making industry. It should never be a profit-driven thing. What could possibly go wrong when you put health together with making profit? Who wants anybody to get healthy if you can make profit from people being sick? Who? So anyway, it's totally irresponsible, and she should retract that about modern monetary theory, and she should, at the very least, stop obfuscating about this whole identity politics thing and making out as if there's something divisive about it, about people organizing, LGBTI people. What about them? Don't they have the right to organize by themselves? And if they wanted to have a closed group, would that be a problem too for Claudia Stauber? Or women wanting a closed group at an anti-war conference, would that have been a problem for Claudia Stauber? Because if she could go in, would that be a problem? Minority groups need to be able to organize. And if Debbie Lusignan has a problem with identity politics, then she must have a problem with Black Lives Matter. Does she have a problem with Black Lives Matter? Don't they have the right to organize? That's identity politics. 1 to 3 people every day are being killed just simply because they're black. Driving while black. Reaching for their coffee while black. Reaching for a cell phone while black. Walking away while black, running away while black. Disparaging the black community simply because they wanted to have a closed group, and continuing on with the obfuscation simply because her friend is frail, has white fragility, and couldn't take the fact that a black person told her she couldn't live stream, and using that and obfuscating that and making out that identity politics is something that is problematic. What a gross distortion, and how unfortunate. And now she's throwing MMT in as some sort of cult. And this is all because she's had her nose put out of joint over this UNAC thing, this anti-war conference, and her friend being told no. How irresponsible. So I invite Debbie Lusignan to stop, to at the very least shut up about this whole identity politics thing, and shut up about modern monetary theory, because she doesn't understand it. Even though she had Steve Grumbine on her channel to explain it, she doesn't understand it, so she's in no position to be disparaging it like this. She doesn't understand it. Now I'm going to read, and you can decide if you want to listen to this. You can tune out now if you like, but I'm going to read something by Hector Danson. He wrote this update a few days ago on Facebook, and it's a few points about the economy. You can choose to tune out now if you want, but for those of you who don't know what modern monetary theory is, there's about 7 points here. It's about 7 paragraphs. So feel free to listen to this. 1. The US government issues its own currency. It can't go broke. It does not require taxes to pay for things. It can afford to pay for any social program it likes, as long as there are real resources and labor to be spent on. 2. Inflation happens when not enough is being produced to meet demand. Therefore, spending on things that increase production is typically not inflationary. Employed, healthy, educated people are more productive. Single-payer healthcare, free education, a better transport network, and a federal job guarantee could be paid for tomorrow without excessive inflation. Taxes are not needed to pay for it. Guarantee could be paid for tomorrow without excessive inflation. Taxes are not needed to pay for it. So this is number 3. Taxes are still necessary. They remove money from the economy. That makes them a tool to control inflation and the value of the dollar. Taxes also increase the public's desire to redistribute wealth, progressive tax system, and to subsidize, penalize helpful, harmful industries, e.g. the clean energy, tobacco. But taxes do not fund spending. They are destroyed upon receipt. Number 4, the Federal Reserve is tasked with issuing new money. They are a tool of Congress. The Fed has some level of independence, but if Congress asks for new spending, the Fed does it. They are a public entity in the most important sense of the word. So if you understand that, Congress asks for new spending and the Fed does it. Number 5, if the government runs a budget deficit, spends more than its taxes, then you, me, and everyone else save money. The private sector is said to be in, quote, surplus, end quote. However, if the government runs a surplus, the private sector is in deficit, and if this goes on too long, you get a recession. As we know from 2008, governments must spend big to end recessions. This doesn't cause inflation because they're spending on underutilized resources. There's only a couple of paragraphs left. 6, the private sector can't handle deficits because it's like a household economy. Income must equal or surpass costs. To keep the private sector in surplus, the government should nearly always run a budget deficit because it's not like a household, it's a currency issuer. Income does not need to surpass costs. The bank in monopoly can't go broke, but the players can. And finally, 7, the national debt does not exist. The so-called debt is a collection of savings accounts at the Fed. Politicians use the idea of debt as an excuse not to spend on the people. This is called modern monetary theory, MMT. It's the world we live in, our economic reality. If we acknowledge that, we take away the excuse politicians use to not give people health care, jobs, and education, clean water, renewable energy, and better infrastructure. If we take away their excuse, the 99% win. That's why some progressives are desperately trying to educate the rest of us about MMT. So I don't know if you follow that, but if you don't understand that, please go to Real Progressives on Facebook. That's at Real Progressive on Facebook. I'll put that in the comments section or in the information section of this video. If you don't understand it, please there's Steve Grumbine, Joe Firestone, and a number of other people. A lot of doctors of economics are talking about it on Real Progressives. I invite you to go there, and regularly they do talks about it, and they're happy to ask questions about it. And the important thing is that you try and open your mind up to the fact that what you're being told about the economy, what you're being told that Congress can't afford things because federal taxes fund spending, it's a big lie. And don't be surprised that governments lie to you about the economics. Because they have no trouble, do they? They have no trouble at all dishing out hundreds of billions of dollars for the military. Does anybody ever ask how they managed to find that money? Just like that. Just like that, they find hundreds of billions of dollars for blowing up other countries and taking their resources and trying to get hegemony in the region. They spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on destroying other countries, but they can't find money for health care. Do you ever wonder why? Because the people are not important, that's why. And in military-industrial complex and corporations run the show and government, and that's what Debbie Lusignan talks about a lot. And that's what other people have been talking about a lot, how the government has been usurped by the military-industrial complex and corporations. And The people who, the Congress and other people in government are just servants to those, to the military-industrial complex, the oil industry, and other corporations and big pharma, etc. So they're just servants to those things, to those corporations, etc. But the fact is, knowledge is power, and when you find out what the Congress has been lying to you all these years, all these decades, and that they can afford single payer healthcare, they can afford it, and they can give you free education, they're just not doing it. When you find that out and you realize through understanding modern monetary theory, something that exists right now, it doesn't need to be sought after, it's actually there right now, because the U.S. U.S. government is not tied to the gold standard. The Fed is not tied to the gold standard, hasn't been since 1971. The United States is a currency issuer. So when you understand that, and you know that, you realize that Congress is lying to you and can fund free health care and can fund free education and fix infrastructure, etc., you'll be outraged and you will want to do something about that. So I invite you to go to that page, Real Progressive, and find out about it, and then tell others about it. Teach other people about it, and then demand that your representatives enact what already exists and stop lying to you that they can't afford these essential rights. They're not privileges. Healthcare is not a privilege, it's a right. So it's in your best interests to do that. And when you hear somebody like Debbie Lusignan, Sane Progressive, telling you that it's some sort of cult, that is just such a fabrication and a lie, an unfortunate and irresponsible thing to say. And I hope that she retracts that. It doesn't matter if the government is usurped right now. It doesn't matter. That is really unfortunate. But education is everything and knowledge is power. And those people still rely on votes. Even if electoral fraud exists, those people still rely on votes. And the more people that know about this and know they're lying, and you demand that they give you what is already, they're already able to do, when you demand it and say, I'm not going to vote for you if you don't do this, you know, they don't want to be voted out. They want a career. They want their jobs. So that's what that's about. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. I was kind of really upset by that, on top of this disparaging the black community, now dumping on modern monetary theory. So I hope that you maybe go to her page and tell her that that's irresponsible and she should retract that unfortunate statement, and also stop going on about the black community as she does, and presenting and misrepresenting what identity politics is. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for listening. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Bye for now.